This episode of The Serialholic contains descriptions of disturbing graphic content, which may be offensive to some people. Listener discretion is advised.
We all have our curiosities into true crime and murder. The reasons, they vary from person to person. My curiosity is the psychology of a serial killer. For me, it always comes down to 3 questions. The first 2 questions delve into the what and why. You can usually find those answers in the history of the person and what factors were embedded in their psyche. Interpersonal relationships, physical, emotional, and sexual abuse, or in some cases, they were simply born that way. In order to understand the third question, you must dive a bit deeper. When? When did that trigger get pulled in their mind that made a human life so insignificant? Most often, the when usually occurs during the pubescent stage, when an adolescent is navigating their way through their emotional and sexual development. Many of us have learned some form of sexual behavior during this development. From fantasies to fetishes to role-playing, we all have something that gets us aroused. And while most of these behaviors are harmless, some may go into more violent and physical extremes. If a person has a difficult upbringing filled with abuse, they are more likely to correlate this form of abuse with their sexuality. In the case of a Connecticut serial killer, Michael Ross, he was physically and emotionally abused by his mother, and reportedly sexually abused by his uncle. His when occurred at the age of 8 on a family egg farm, when he would strangle and snap the necks of sick and undergrown chickens. Ed Kemper's when came after he killed and dismembered the family cat when he was 9 years old. A surge of power and control consumed him. This was due to his mother's constant emotional abuse of being a burden, useless, and never being good or worthy enough for a woman's affection. His emasculation as a child and fear of rejection was so great that in his adult life, he could only have sexual relations with a woman who was dead, and he could assert his power by decapitating them. For Dennis Rader, it came down to a ring. Although Rader's mother wasn't nearly as bad as the previous 2 examples, she did neglect Dennis by not being very motherly. She was often caught up in her books, TV, or other activities, to not give the affection needed in a child's early development, and for this, he held a grudge against her. When Rader was a young boy, his mother was digging through the couch when her ring got caught in a spring. She began to panic and screamed as she struggled to free her hand. She called on Dennis to help her, but he just stood there, watching. Rader found himself aroused by the sight. A woman crying and begging to be released from her restraint triggered a euphoric sensation throughout his body. It was this moment, in my opinion, the when BTK was born. I'm Dave Jari, and I am the Serialholic. Dennis Rader was the first of 4 children born to William and Dorothea Rader on March 9, 1945, in Pittsburgh, Kansas. His father, a Marine at the time of his birth, started a job at the KG&E Electric Company in 1948 and soon moved his family to Wichita. Rader's mother was withdrawn from her children. She wasn't domineering or physically abusive. She just didn't seem to want to be bothered by them. Rader was described as an unremarkable child, both in his personality and in his studies. He was borderline to below average, often struggling to maintain passing grades. He was active in the Boy Scouts, in his church youth group, and, as his secret fantasies of bondage and torture developed, he was also active in killing dogs and cats by stringing them up by their necks, He knew that the latter was not appropriate behavior, so he learned to separate his reality from his fantasy, and he became very proficient in leading a double life. When he entered high school, he began working at a supermarket, and he had a passion for knowledge. He loved to learn, but struggled in retaining the information he was taught. He had very poor grammar, often misspelling words and using incorrect sentence structure. This would become somewhat of a focal point in later years during his communications with the press and law enforcement. People who knew him during this time described him as quiet, void of a sense of humor, but very polite, and when he spoke to him, he measured every word. His outwardly demeanor made him unnoticeable to those passing him in the hallways, but the fires that raged inside him would one day make him the most hated man in Kansas. Rader graduated from Wichita Heights High School in 1963. He continued to work at the supermarket, and in 1965, enrolled at Kansas Wesleyan College. He made a decision to reinvent himself and joined a fraternity. He would state in his journals during this time that the transition to college so far away from home was difficult, and he struggled academically and financially, traveling back to Wichita on the weekends to continue his work at the supermarket. It was also noted in his journals that this was when he began trolling women. There was no record stating that he followed through with any of these fantasies, but there were numerous trial runs, and he often broke into people's homes to steal souvenirs. In 1966, in an apparent attempt to avoid the draft for the Vietnam War, Rader enlisted in the U.S. Air Force. During his 4 years of service, he traveled to Japan, Korea, Turkey, and Greece, as well as the states of Texas and Alabama. It was during this time he became sexually active for the first time, frequenting prostitutes and attempting to bring his bondage fantasies to life. He continued to troll women and break into various military buildings and homes. In 1970, he left active service with the rank of sergeant and returned to Wichita, Kansas. Within the next year, he had married 23-year-old Paula Dietz on May 22, 1971. Paula was from the same area and attended the same high school, and as with Rader, she was a devout Lutheran. During the early years of their marriage, Rader would bounce from job to job and even went back to school where he continued to struggle. In 1973, Rader found himself unemployed and spiraled into an unhealthy frame of mind. He would dive deeper into his fantasy world of bondage. He would often spy on women outside of their homes dressed in women's clothing and masturbate. Rader would also frequently wear women's panties that he stole from various homes and would tie himself up to achieve sexual release. By his own admission, Rader began to wonder, what would it feel like to strangle someone to death?
I'm Carmen Julie Otero Montoya. Although we have never met, you have seen my face before. It is the same face you murdered over 30 years ago. The face of my mother, Julie Otero. BTK is how you want to be known, and I will not give you that satisfaction. Rader, when you took away my mother, you took someone who meant a lot to a lot of people. My mother loved life, her friends, a good laugh, dancing with my dad, and she loved to help people. But most of all, she loved and lived for us, her family. She showed me how to love, to be a good person, to accept others as they are, and most of all, to face your fears. I'm sure you saw that in her face as she fought to live. My mother against your gun. You are such a coward. Since they were children, my father loved my mother more than any kind of love you could ever comprehend. He adored her. My father was a hard-working man, and we always felt secure. He made sure we had what we needed, but at the same time, we understood there was always someone else more in need. My dad loved to see us having a good time, and he never passed on a dance with my mom, even in the commissary. He loved trips to the beach and to the country. We always went with friends and family. Those good times were very important to him. The thing that everyone remembers of my father is that he demanded respect, but that he gave it in return. I'm sure you could feel his love for his family as you took away his last breath. You are such a coward. My sister Josie. You should not have the privilege of even saying her name. Such a sweet girl. All she ever wanted was to be happy and successful in school. She had dreams. She was my shadow and at the same time her own person. It's amazing to me that you could be so cruel to a sweet, beautiful child. His name was Joey, not Junior. But I guess it really doesn't matter to you. You took away the most lovable, fun, outgoing, friendly, and adorable little brother anyone could ever imagine. He could have done something big with his life, but you took care of that, didn't you? A man with a gun against a little boy. You are definitely a coward.
The Otero family was new to the area. 38-year-old Joseph Otero, having served in the Navy and Air Force for 20 years, had retired in 1973 with the rank of Master Sergeant. The Oteros were familiar with adjusting to new environments. Being a military family, they lived in New Jersey, England, and Panama, among other places, before finally settling down in a middle-class neighborhood on Edgemore Street in Wichita, Kansas in the fall of 1973. Joe began work as a mechanic at nearby Cooks Airfield, and his wife, 34-year-old Julie Otero, found work at the Coleman Corporation. They had 5 children: Charlie, 15, Danny, 14, Carmen, 13, Josephine, 11, and Joseph Jr., 9. Joseph and Julie led a strict but loving household. They raised their children to be respectful and stressed the importance of school and country. It is said that all the Otero children were honor roll students. This was an exciting time for the Oteros as they began to plant roots in the new community, but lurking in the shadows, evil would soon show up at their doorstep. It has been speculated many different ways as to how Dennis Rader set his sights on the Otero family. Rader himself claims that he didn't know any of the family, but some reports put Rader and Julie Otero working together at the Coleman Corporation, the last job Rader had. I guess the question shouldn't be how he became obsessed with the Oteros, but why. As we will find in all of his victims, Rader would go through a trolling stage, where he would go about town looking to find someone that caught his eye. Once he found that person, he would then stalk them, learn their habits, when they would leave their home and when they would arrive. The Oteros would be difficult being such a large family, but the obsession burning inside of him would be greater than the risk. It may have been Julie that first brought his uncontrollable urges to the forefront, but if it was, she would take a back seat to a new target: 11-year-old Josephine. Rader would plan the date and time he would make his move: Tuesday, January 15th, 1974, 7:30 a.m. This would be the best time to strike. Joe would be at work, and the 3 older children would be in school, leaving just Julie, Josephine, and Joseph Jr. He had everything ready. He had put together what he called a hit kit, consisting of a gun, knives, cords, and tools to break into a house. He arrived at 803 North Edgemore Street just after 7 a.m. He crept around the outside of the house and cut the phone line. Doubt began to set in. He paused for a time, debating whether to go through with it or just walk away, when the back door opened up. It was 9-year-old Joseph Jr. letting the dog out. Rader and Joseph Jr. made eye contact, and Rader made his move. He forced his way into the home, and things quickly went awry. Joe was home. This is not the way Rader fantasized about this moment. He quickly drew his gun and pointed it at Joe. He exclaimed that he was a fugitive from justice, and everyone would be safe if they just followed his orders. He needed food and the keys to their car for his escape. The family dog was making things very difficult for Rader, so he ordered Joe to get rid of the dog. Joe told Joseph Jr. to let him out in the backyard. Rader then led Joe, Julie, Josephine, and Joseph to the bedroom. Joe and Joseph were told to lay on the floor, and Julie and Josephine were laid on the bed. He tied them all up with the cord from his hit kit, then placed a plastic bag over Joe's head and secured it with more cord. The family began to panic. He turned his attention to Julie, who was laying on the bed next to Josephine. He strangled Julie with his hands until she passed out. Rader then strangled Josephine, who also lost consciousness. During this time, Joe had torn a hole in the plastic bag and tried to break through his restraints. Rader then returned to him, placed a t-shirt over the first bag, and then another plastic bag over the t-shirt. Joe Otero then suffocated to death. Rader moved to Joseph and placed a plastic bag over his head. At this time, Julie had regained consciousness and began to plead with Rader to spare her children. To calm her down, he removed the bag from Joseph Jr.'s head and then strangled Julie with a cord around her neck. Joe and Julie Otero were now dead. Rader moved Joseph to his bedroom and replaced the bag on his head, a t-shirt, and then another bag. Indents in the carpet show that a chair was placed next to Joseph, indicating that Rader sat there and watched the boy die. He returned to the main bedroom and realized that Josephine was now awake. He carried Josephine to the basement, strung a rope over a pipe, placed it around her neck, and lifted her off of her feet. He pulled her panties down to her ankles, and he masturbated to completion as the life slipped from Josephine's body. Rader then straightened up the home, removed the watch from Joe, drove the Otero's car down the street, walked back, and drove away in his own car. At approximately 3:30 p.m., Charlie, Danny, and Carmen returned home from school. They noticed that the dog was outside, which was a bit odd because it would never be outside by itself. As Charlie was attending to the dog, he heard screaming coming from Danny and Carmen within the house. When Charlie entered his parents' bedroom, his first thought was that they were playing a sick prank on them. They quickly learned it wasn't a prank. They attempted to call for help, but the phone was dead. Danny ran to a neighbor's. As the police were searching through the house, Charlie was thinking of how he was going to tell Josephine and Joseph that their parents were dead when they returned from school. He would soon find out. He wouldn't have to.
Your Honor, my name is Kevin Bright, and this is a victim impact statement, and I'm here representing my late sister Kathy. The pain and suffering that he's caused our family, and the loss of such a beautiful young lady at 21 over 31 years ago. And I think about her and what she'd be doing nowadays, if she could have had a life. Her execution by that monster was, he's got to go on and live his life 31 years now with raising a family, children. He snuffed out 10 people's lives that had done nothing. My sister, she suffered so much. It was brought out that she fought, it's quoted as a Hellcat. And I'm so proud of her for that, because I knew, she had that in her. But she lived on approximately 5 hours after that, and she received over 20 pints of blood before she lost her battle. As far as myself, the damage I received, looking at me, you don't see, that much. I have a scar here, some up here where he shot me, but it was reported that I had permanent brain damage, and I don't have that, but I have permanent nerve damage, which causes me to suffer with, my body doesn't regulate the heat very well, and the humidity, and so I overheat, and I get weak and everything. So that's one thing I suffer with for every day. That's what I have to tell. Just thank you for letting me speak.
Rader was out trolling again not long after the Otero murders. Apparently killing 4 members of a young family wasn't enough to satisfy his evil, sadistic fantasies. He was now trolling several women at a time, or as he would call them, projects. It's really unnerving when you put this into context. You are simply in your home, in your workplace, walking your dog, literally going about your everyday life, and some sick fuck chooses you to die. This was the case for 21-year-old Catherine Bright. She was one of 5 children born to Charles and Dorothy Bright, who loved to sing in her church choir. She was described as very friendly, popular, smart, and excelled in her studies at college. Catherine was also reported to work at the Coleman Corporation, and as with Julie Otero, It is unclear if she and Rader crossed paths while working there. According to Rader, he was driving down the road when he spotted Catherine and a friend entering her home. That was it. A chance passing, and she was marked for death. Rader would begin stalking her to find out when she would be most vulnerable, and he also gave her a name. Project Lights Out. The date was set, April 4th, 1974, less than 3 months after the Otero murders. Rader, equipped with a Magnum revolver and a .22 pistol, would leave his car a few blocks away at a park on the university campus. He walked to her house when he knew she wouldn't be home, slipped into the backyard, cut the phone lines, and broke into her house through the back door. He hid inside a closet that would be most effective for an ambush, and waited. At around 2 p.m., Catherine came home, and Rader was ready to pounce. As she approached Rader's hiding spot, he came out and pointed his .22 in her direction. There was a problem, though. Catherine's 19-year-old brother, Kevin, was with her. Panicked, he ordered them both into one of the bedrooms and gave them a story similar to the Oteros. He was wanted in California, and all he needed was some food and the keys to their car, but he would have to tie them up first to ensure his getaway. He ordered Catherine to bind Kevin's hands and feet. Then Rader tied Kevin to the bed. He then led Catherine to a separate bedroom and did the same to her. He returned to Kevin's room, where Rader was going to strangle him to death. As he did so, Kevin broke free of his restraints, and the struggle ensued. Rader pulled out his .22 and shot Kevin in the head. With blood pouring out from the wound, Rader left him to die and went back to Catherine. She too had managed to loosen the binds around her wrists, and she began to fight. Rader quickly overpowered her and started to strangle her. As she lost consciousness, Rader heard a disturbance from the other bedroom. Miraculously, Kevin was still alive. Rader went back into Kevin's room, and another fight broke out. This time, Kevin was able to remove the Magnum revolver from Rader's holster. They struggled over the Magnum as Rader pulled his .22 out and shot Kevin in the face. He went back into Catherine's room to find that she had regained consciousness, and again, a fight between them broke out. The entire scene was chaos, and Rader was losing control of the situation. Unable to strangle her, he pulled out a knife and began stabbing her in the back and lower abdomen. Rader then heard another noise coming from outside of the room. When he went to go check on Kevin, he was gone. He began searching for him and realized that the front door was open. He hurried to the door to witness Kevin running down the street. Rader freaked out. He ran back into the house to gather his hit kit and grabbed the keys to both Catherine and Kevin's vehicles. He didn't know which keys went to which vehicle, so he couldn't use them to escape. He had no other choice but to run for it. He hustled a few blocks back to his car and left the scene. Kevin was able to get help, and when emergency personnel arrived, Catherine was still alive. However, despite emergency surgery and multiple blood transfusions, she passed from her injuries a few hours later. In an ironic twist, it was around this time that Rader began working for ADT, a home security company, and he would install this security equipment for people who were in fear of BTK. He held this job until 1988.
My name's Steve Relford, Shirley Vian with my mother. I haven't prepared for this statement, but I'd just like for him to suffer for the rest of his life.
As the Otero and Bright cases were growing cold, an editor from the Wichita Eagle newspaper received a call in October of 1974. He was instructed by the man on the phone that a letter could be found in an engineering book at the Wichita Public Library. Police were dispatched to the library, where they found the poorly written letter, telling in precise, gruesome detail of the Otero murders. The letter also stated,
I did it myself, with no one's help. The code words for me will be bind them, torture them, kill them. BTK.
After this, Rader went silent. The letters stopped, the phone calls stopped, and the murders stopped. By 1977, life in Wichita, Kansas had barely gotten back to normal when another family was destroyed by the hands of BTK. Rader had started trolling and stalking again. He had a few women who he had deemed as projects, but his intended target, a woman named Cheryl, who he had met in a bar, hadn't been home on the day of March 17th. He walked down the road where he had previously trolled another woman, Shirley Vian, and saw her 5-year-old son walking along the sidewalk. Shirley wasn't feeling well and asked her son to go to the store for her. Rader had called to the boy and showed him a picture of a woman and a boy and asked him if he had seen them. The boy said he hadn't and then went home. A few minutes later, Rader knocked on the door. The boy answered and Rader introduced himself as a detective and asked if his parents were home. The boy stated that his mother was, but she was sick in bed. Rader walked into the home and immediately shut the TV off and closed the blinds to the windows. Shirley emerged from the bedroom where she had been lying down, and Rader pulled a gun. Startled, she gathered her 3 children as Rader went through the house. He first tied up the children in the bedroom, but they were visibly upset, so he gathered blankets and toys and placed them in a tub. He took the children and led them to the bathroom where he tied the door shut so they wouldn't be able to come out. Rader had asked Shirley to help him push the bed up against the bathroom door. Rader explained to Shirley exactly what he was going to do. She was now in a panic and she threw up. In order to calm her down, he poured her a glass of water and sat down with her to smoke a cigarette. As the children were screaming and crying in the bathroom, Rader stripped Shirley naked and bound her legs and hands behind her back. He then slipped a bag over her head and wrapped a cord around her neck. The bathroom door was open enough for her children to witness Rader strangling their mother to death and then masturbating over her corpse. Rader had every intention of killing the children once he fulfilled his murderous fantasy with Shirley, but the phone began ringing and Rader recalled that one of the children told him that the neighbor would be stopping by to check on them. So he hurriedly gathered his hit kit and fled the house. The children were able to free themselves about 40 minutes later. One of the children tried to untie the binds from their mother but couldn't do it. They then left the house and notified a neighbor. In 1983, the young boy Rader first approached, now aged 11, came across a picture hanging on his grandparents' wall and fear shot through his body. It was the same exact picture BTK had shown him 6 years earlier.
My name's Beverly Platt, and Nancy Fox is my sister. I cannot begin to explain to you. There are not words to make you understand what losing Nancy has meant to me and my family. I lost a friend, a confidant. My children will never have an aunt, and I'll never have another sister. Nancy's death is like a deep wound that will never, ever heal. As far as I'm concerned, Dennis Rader does not deserve to live. I want him to suffer as much as he made his victims suffer. But then, when I think about that, in his sick, perverted way, he'd probably find that as some kind of pleasure or reward. This man needs to be thrown in a deep, dark hole and left to rot. He should never, ever see the light of day. And I have some afterlife scenarios for him. On the day he dies, Nancy and all of his victims will be waiting with God and watching him as he burns in hell.
Nancy Fox was your definition of a strong, independent woman. She worked 2 jobs, lived on her own, and she wasn't afraid to tell you the truth, even if it wasn't the truth you wanted to hear. She was adventurous, outgoing, and at the age of 25, she had her entire life in front of her, and she was going to live it to the fullest. To her family and friends, Nancy was their entire world. But to police, she was BTK victim number 7. Rader first spotted Nancy as she was entering her modest duplex. Little did she know, as she was going about her daily routine that day, she was now marked for death. Rader returned to her home on December 8, 1977, while she was at work at a local jewelry store. He cut the phone line and broke in through the back door. Through his stalking phase, he knew that she had lived alone, so he was at ease as he waited for Nancy to return. Upon her arrival, she entered her kitchen as Rader thrust into action. He held her at gunpoint and told her that he had a sexual problem, and in order to alleviate that problem, he needed to tie her up and rape her. He forced Nancy upstairs and allowed her to undress in the bathroom. Rader himself got naked. He threw her on the bed and bound her wrists and ankles. As he lay over her, he wrapped a cord around her neck and revealed his true intentions. He was BTK, and she was about to die. With the tightening of the cord, Nancy slipped into unconsciousness, and then death. Rader stood over her lifeless body and masturbated onto her nightgown. The following day, on his way to work at ADT, Rader stopped at a payphone and called the police. His message was simple.
You'll find a homicide. 843 South Pershing. Nancy Fox.
Police raced to Nancy's home and found her dead. They listened to the recording numerous times, trying to pick up on some clues, and they even played it for Nancy's family, hoping they could recognize the voice, to no avail. In early 1978, the Wichita Eagle received a poem titled Shirley Locks, mocking the murder of Shirley Vian. Mistaking it as something other than a murder confession, they published it in the classified ads, which infuriated Rader. He sent another letter, more aggressive, more detailed, claiming responsibility for the last 7 murders. He then sent a third letter, mocking the death of Nancy Fox, titled, "Oh Death to Nancy."
My name is Rod Hook, representing the family of Marine Hedge. I would only ask that the court provide the maximum sentence allowed by law to this monster. I would also like to thank all the members of the task force for making this possible. I know in most of our minds we can't imagine what our families went through, but I respectfully request that the court think of that when you provide Mr. Rader with the sentence he so deserves. Thank you.
It was now 1985. 8 years have passed since the last BTK murder. Rader and his wife Paula have 2 children who are now of age to participate in activities. Rader became the scout leader for his son's Cub Scout troop and was very active in church leadership roles. The shockwave of the previous BTK murders were still ever present because, as of this date, none of the murders had been solved, and the killer was still free to kill whomever he chose. 53-year-old Marine Hedge was a widowed woman who was described as gentle and caring, and she loved the garden. She had lived a few houses down from Rader for several years, and they would often see each other throughout the neighborhood. Rader never considered Marine as a project because, as he stated later to police, a serial killer never kills in their habitat. Yet Rader was emboldened because he was able to create such devastation without ever getting caught. He thought if he could commit this murder in his own neighborhood, it would be a biggie. On April 27, 1985, he was attending a Boy Scouts meeting when he claimed that he had a stomachache and needed to leave to get some medicine. He left, grabbed his hit kit from his car, went to the bowling alley located nearby and bought a beer. Pretending to be too drunk to drive, he called for a taxi to take him to Park City. As he was close to Marine's house, he asked the driver to pull over and he would walk the rest of the way because he needed to get some air. He approached the home and noticed that Marine's car was in the driveway, so he cautiously entered the back door of the residence and crept his way through the house. Marine wasn't home. Soon, Rader heard a noise coming from the front door and hid himself in the closet. Marine entered with a male friend who had stayed with her for roughly an hour. Rader remained hidden until the man left and Marine was fast asleep. It was 1 a.m. when he finally emerged from the closet. He flipped on the bathroom light and approached her just as she was waking up. Marine let out a scream as Rader attacked her and strangled her to death. Unlike his previous murders, Rader took the lifeless body of Marine Hedge to the basement of his church, where he posed her in various positions of bondage, took pictures, and masturbated before dumping her body in a ditch a short distance away from her home. She was discovered 8 days later. The murder of Marine Hedge struck fear in the entire neighborhood. BTK had struck so close to home. The Rader family knew Marine Hedge and would wave and stop for a quick chat as they passed her house on their walk to church every Sunday. So Rader's children weren't free from feeling fear themselves. After expressing their fears in the wake of Marine's death, Rader assured his entire family they were safe, and this BTK would never do them any harm.
My name is Stephanie Klein. My mother is Vicki Wagerly. I'm speaking to you today on behalf of myself and my brother Brandon. It's been almost 19 years now that my brother and I had the most important woman in our lives taken from us. My brother and I had to go through so many important moments in our lives without her. Every day is a struggle to get through without her. It's not fair that we had so little time with her. I only had 10 years with her. Brandon only had 2. Anyone who knew my mom knew how much she loved her family. She loved her children, her husband, her parents, and her sister. She loved her in-laws like they were her own parents, brothers and sisters. She adored her nieces and nephews. Even her friends were considered family to her. There's nothing she wouldn't do for any one of us. We didn't have enough time with her. It's not fair that her 3 grandbabies will never get to know her. She doesn't get to see me with her grandchildren, and she doesn't get to see her baby Brandon with his first child. My mom would so love the fact that that baby girl looks just like Brandon did when he was little. She won't ever get to hold them or watch them grow up. She would have loved being a grandma. It's not fair that my 4-year-old son has to ask why his Mima can't come home. He draws her pictures. We should be able to take these to her, but they just sit on the fridge. Even at 4, he knows it's not right that she should be here with us. And what did my baby do to deserve feeling this way? What did any of us do to deserve this? My mother begged for her life, yet he showed no remorse. He saw that she had a family and a little boy right there in the house with her, yet he continued with his sick plan. I ask you today, Your Honor, to show no remorse for him. Don't let this monster have any comforts as he lives out his remaining years in prison. He isn't worthy. Thank you, Your Honor.
Vicki Wagerly had met her husband Bill in high school. They were just 17 years old when they were married, and by 18, they were parents to a beautiful little girl. A son was added to the family 8 years later, and for both Vicki and Bill, their life was perfect. Until September 16th, 1986. Police received a frantic phone call from Bill stating that he had come home for lunch and found his 2-year-old son unattended in the living room. Bill searched throughout the house for Vicki. It wasn't until he looked on the far side of the bed, on the floor, he found his wife, bound and barely clinging to life. She was raced to the hospital, but was pronounced dead a few hours later. Bill quickly became the #1 suspect. He declared his innocence, but after 2 failed polygraph tests, the cloud of suspicion hung heavy over Bill. Police didn't have enough evidence to charge him with Vicki's murder, but that didn't free him from being the only suspect in her death. This suspicion lasted for 18 years until the real murderer spoke up. There was a knock on the door at 10 a.m. on that fateful day by a man dressed as a telephone repairman. Vicki, being told that there were issues with her phone line, reluctantly let him in. She quickly regretted that decision. Rader cut the phone line before pulling a gun on Vicki and led her to the bedroom. There, he attempted to tie her up, but he underestimated Vicki's will to survive. She fought back so ferociously that she left Rader with numerous cuts, bruises, and scratches. In the end, though, he was able to overpower Vicki and strangled her. He posed her body in various positions and took photos of her. He collected his hit kit, took her keys, and drove off in her car. Bill recalls passing Vicki's car on his way home, but didn't recognize the driver. Rader abandoned the car a few blocks from the house and walked home. He changed his clothes and continued living as if nothing had happened.
I'm Jeffrey Davis, son of Dolores Davis, BTK victim January 18, 1991. May it please the court to allow me to express my thoughts and feelings to all the victim survivors here among us today, in the hope that we can leave this courtroom with some sense of peace and legal resolution. For the last 5,326 days, I have wondered what it would be like to confront the walking cesspool that took my mother's precious life. Throughout that time, I always envisioned this day as being one for avenging the past. I could think of nothing but savoring the bittersweet taste of revenge as justice is served upon this social sewage here before us today. While you sink into an emotional abyss of hopelessness and despair, we will channel our grief into positive endeavors, those life activities which would please the ones we have lost. While you agonize over the reality that your last victims were ironically your own family, we will embrace the new family we now have, with whom we will always share a common bond forged from the pain of adversity and loss. While your body wastes away in prison, we will renew ourselves by incorporating into our lives those characteristics modeled by our loved ones: humility, compassion, honor, integrity, kindness, selflessness, and love. Traits which your twisted, cancerous mind cannot comprehend, I realize. While your wretched soul awaits pronouncement of the one true justice, your damnation to hell for eternity, we will thank God for every day He gives us, realizing as only we can just how precious life really is. Finally, we want you to know that we who could so easily have succumbed to your quagmire of madness will not give you that satisfaction. Your despicable actions will not defeat us. Our very lives will be testimony that good can triumph over even the most hideous form of evil and perversion. Just as your days are now over, ours are just beginning. In the final analysis, you have to live with the cold reality that while all of us here will overcome your depravity, you have now lost everything, and you will forever remain nothing. May that torment you for the rest of your tortured existence. Thank you, Your Honor.
Admittedly, Rader had a penchant for younger women, including young girls, but he learned through his murders that older women were more vulnerable and less of a risk. 5 years had passed since the murder of Vicki Wagerly, and Rader was stalking the next project. 62-year-old Dolores Davis lived near his parents' house, and she lived alone. Rader set his sights on her after passing by one day and seeing her in front of her house. Rader was on a Boy Scout camping trip on the weekend of January 19, 1991. That evening, Rader made an excuse that he had to leave for a short time. He already had the hit kit in his car, so he drove to his parents' house where he changed out of his scout uniform and into what he called his kill clothes. He then drove to a Baptist church, parked his car, and he walked the rest of the way to Dolores' house. It was very cold that evening, and as Rader was walking, he had reservations about continuing but decided that this would be the most opportune time to strike. When he arrived, he had difficulty breaking into the home using his usual method. He opted to use a concrete block and smashed it through the sliding glass door. Dolores awoke and raced out of her room thinking that a car had crashed into her house. There, she found Rader. He used the same ploy he had used numerous times before. He was wanted, needed food, a car, and he needed to tie her up. He bound Dolores and went through her house looking for personal items to take with him. He returned to her and strangled her to death with pantyhose. He carried her body to the trunk of her car, drove to a lake near Park City, and hid her body. He drove Dolores' car back to her house, walked to the church, drove to his parents' house where he changed back into his scout uniform, and then returned to his scout troop. The next evening, Rader returned to Dolores' body, placed a mask on her face, posed her in various degrading positions, and took photos of her. He placed her body into the trunk of his car and moved her to another location under a bridge. All throughout the span of BTK, his wife and children were oblivious to the fact that their husband and father was a sick and sadistic killer. Not that there weren't any clues. Rader would mark up and save all articles related to the BTK murders. He was obsessed with watching the nightly news and would show visible signs of aggravation when they got something wrong or didn't fully give recognition to BTK. Like with the Otero family, who police removed from their list of BTK murders because they were different from the other murders that had taken place. There was one instance where an audio recording was aired on the news, and Paula had commented on how much the killer sounded like Rader. There was also the box Rader had kept in the house. Paula never once questioned it or tried to see what contents were inside. If she had, she would have found what Rader called his mother lode. Clothes, underwear, photos, identification, and numerous other items that Rader had collected from his victims over the last 30 years. BTK went dormant from 1991 to 2004. There were no killings, no communications, nothing. That is until the Wichita Eagle ran a story covering the 30th anniversary of the Otero murders. They wrote about the unsolved murders and they failed to give Rader proper credit. This sent him into a furious spiral. On March 14, 2004, Rader had begun a series of communications with the Wichita Eagle, the local news station, and police. The first was an envelope sent to the Eagle that contained 3 pictures of Vicki Wagerly, her driver's license, and a letter signed by BTK. On May 5th, a letter was received by KAKE-TV with a word puzzle. June 7th, a package was found taped to a traffic sign that contained an in-depth, gruesome description of the Otero murders. Another letter was found on June 17th, claiming BTK was ready to strike again. A package was found by a UPS driver on October 22nd, containing drawings of children in various forms of bondage. A letter was also found with inaccurate statements of BTK, including the year he was born and where he lived in an attempt to throw off the investigation. These communications persisted over the next several months, including a Barbie doll in bondage and a rope around its neck, insinuating the murder of Josephine Otero. One communication, in particular, was a special case cereal box placed in the back of a pickup truck. Inside was a question as to whether police would be able to trace location information from a floppy disk. Police went to the location of where the pickup truck had been located and reviewed surveillance footage. they saw the grainy image of a person driving a black Jeep Cherokee place a cereal box inside the truck. In response to the floppy disk question, police placed an ad in the Wichita Eagle stating that they were unable to trace the information. In mid-February of 2005, the floppy disk was sent to KAKE-TV. Police quickly analyzed the disk and found that it had come from a computer registered to the Christ Lutheran Church, and the author of the disk was a man named Dennis. Police did a Google search of the church and found that Dennis could be Dennis Rader, listed as a church council president. They drove by the home of Dennis Rader and saw a black Jeep Cherokee parked in the driveway. Police believed they had found BTK, but needed further proof. They obtained a search warrant for medical records of Rader's daughter and ran her DNA against DNA from the semen found at some of the murder sites. It was a familial match. Dennis Rader was BTK. On February 25th, Paula Rader had made lunch for her and her husband. It was custom for him to come home during the day so they could share lunch together. On this day, Dennis seemed to be running a little late. Paula waited at the table for him to arrive when her entire life exploded. Police charged through the door and started ripping through her house. She was scared, panicked, and told the officers that her husband would be home soon. He wouldn't come home ever again, and neither would Paula. She couldn't bring herself to live there after she discovered the evil her husband inflicted throughout Wichita and the surrounding area. A week later, the lunch still sat at the kitchen table, uneaten. This episode of Serialholic was written and produced by me, Dave Jari. The music for this episode is licensed through Epidemic Sound. To learn more about the Serialholic, please visit theserialholic.com, where you can find links to our social media, YouTube, Patreon, as well as apparel and merchandise. You can reach me through social media or at theserialholic@gmail.com if you have any ideas for a future episode or for general communication. As always, stay tuned for more episodes, and thank you for being a Serialholic.